I know I'm dating myself when I say that this episode has me humming, I see a mansard roof through the trees. Shout out to my Vampire Weekend stans. I see you. And after this episode, you may also be seeing more mansard roofs hiding in plain sight everywhere you look. Now, what does this have to do with mid-mod remodel? Mansard roofs belong along a street in Paris, or maybe on an 80s vintage Burger King? Well, the mid-century years were a time of a lot of experiments, and one experiment that a number of architects and builders seemed to independently decide to try during our favorite decades was remaking the traditional mansard roof style into a house. And that's what we're talking about today. Welcome back to the Mid-Mod Remodel podcast. This is a show about updating MCM homes, helping you match a mid-century home to your modern life. I'm your host, Stella Hansman, architect and mid-century ranch enthusiast. You're listening to episode 2303, and today I am talking with one of my favorite mid-century fans, mid-century stans, Adam Stevens. We had this call on my schedule. I thought we were going to talk about how to better research your mid-century home, and instead, he hooked me right into his latest little research rabbit hole, which is noticing and trying to find out more information about mansard-style mid-century homes all around the Denver area. The more we talked about it, the more I started realizing I have seen them around Madison, in my own neighborhood. I had completely erased out of my brain the fact that one of the first houses I did as mid-mod remodel, one of the first proto-master plan designs, was a modern mansard roof house. So this may ring a bell with you. This may actually be something you have a personal connection to, or maybe it's just an example of the weird little rabbit holes that mid-century fans can go down one way or another. I know everyone always enjoys an episode with Adam, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Before I do, a quick item of calendar interest. It's January. Hi. This is a time of year when people start to think about plans and goals and the future again. And it's particularly a time when a lot of people start to ponder if this year is the year that some small or large remodeling should happen on the house. If that's you, then step one is reaching out and having a first call. You and I can chat about what's going on in your house, what you'd like to change about it, what you have to change about it, and what you already know and love about it. Look, you don't have to have every single duck lined up in a tidy little row before you get the ball rolling on your mid-century master plan. In fact, the mid-century master plan process is about getting your ducks into a row. We will hold your hand and ask you for the kind of information you need about your house, your hopes and dreams. What is the definition of your personal style? You don't need to know all those things before we begin the process. All you need to do is get it started. So because I so often have to apologize to people who've come to me because they're now all ready, they're now all excited, and they have urgency, how quickly can we do their master plan? And I have to tell them that we've got a first signed, first served basis, and we've got a bunch of other people in line ahead of them. Let me encourage you to start the ball rolling now while you're thinking maybe this is the right time, rather than waiting until the time when you're sure it's the right time, and then you have to go ahead and wait again. Hurry up and wait is never a good feeling. And design does take time, but it has so much value in terms of helping you figure out what's possible, what's probable, and what's going to happen next. By the way, if you haven't caught it already, you want to check out this week's YouTube video because it's the beginning of a series of case study analyses where I'm talking through a recent mid-century master plan project, not just as it was solving the specific problems for that homeowner, but as it is perhaps general. This first case study I chose is how to make the most out of a small mid-century house. Many people feel like their mid-century houses are small. This house I'm featuring is quite possibly the smallest that I have ever done any master plan work on. The dimensions of every single room are the snuggest. I had my design assistant notice that it had a similar floor plan to a project we'd done. Not the same, but sort of a little sibling floor plan to a project we'd done earlier this past summer. But when we compared the two of them, this one was smaller by inches and sometimes feet in multiple dimensions. So I'm going to show you how this house actually is going to be transformed into the perfect jewel box little container for all of the activities, projects, crafts, engagements, hobbies, and social hosting that this couple could dream of, without adding a single square foot to its footprint. It's a really fun video. Go check it out. and think about getting the process underway, reaching out soon rather than later to have a conversation with me about what's possible, what's probable, what's a good idea for your mid-century dream house. Okay, you may remember Adam from previous conversations we've had here on the podcast. He is doing amazing work all the time, documenting, promoting, and matching people with amazing mid-century modern homes. You can follow him on Instagram, dig in more deeply with his second Instagram account, specifically documenting the Harvey Park neighborhood of Denver, or check out the, I think, 4 previous episodes I've chatted with him on. Those are 1103 and 4 and 1805 and 1812. We've talked about the history of Denver, the history of building, of energy resources for vintage houses, just all sorts of great stuff. And he is a constant delight and a wonderful mid-century friend to have. He can be your mid-century friend too. So find all the great Adam resources on my show notes page at midmod-midwest.com/2303. Without further ado, let us allow him to take us down a research rabbit hole into modern mansard roof houses and all that's great and sort of horrifying about them. There will also, by the way, be many pictures that he has shared on the show notes page, midmod-midwest.com/2303. I'm Della. I'm talking to Adam Stevens, a local real estate agent in Denver, Colorado, and also one of my favorite people to talk to about going deep into the lore, into the history, into the background. You are maybe the best mid-century research I know. And if you're curious about Adam, by the way, listeners, there are a host of other podcast episodes of interviews we've had, and I will link to all of them in the show notes page. But we are not giving you the episode I thought we were going to today, because before we started recording, Adam persuaded me that we should talk about Neo-Mansard homes. And I'm so curious, what got you started down the rabbit hole of Neo-Mansard homes?
Well, the first thing is one of the things I don't know offhand is how many people even know what a neo-mansard is.
Good question. Yeah.
Or even what a mansard is. So, being an architect, you probably took lots of architectural history classes. You probably learned about the mansard roof, which kind of comes from France, Paris. If you think of a lot of the buildings in Paris, they have mansard roofs, which is kind of, you look at the top portion of the building and the attic floor of the building, you could say, is a bit of an angle. And there's usually dormer windows or something like that at the top of the building. And I want to say, when I was taking my architectural history classes, there was something about, it was an attempt to try to reclaim attic space, to put more living space into a building or something like that. But stylistically, it became kind of the signature of French architecture.
Right. Well, and not by accident either. I mean, okay, so my history nerd kicking in here. The move towards mansard roof designs in Paris came hand in glove with a huge urban renewal project, which, if we were looking at it today, we would probably think was pretty politically iffy. They did a lot of slum clearance. They moved a lot of immigrant or undesirable populations to the people in power at that time, were sort of shoved out, and they cut a bunch of big pathways through the city to make grand, dramatic, basically military parade grounds. And then they put in a whole bunch of houses that all looked the same. I want to say they were all 6 stories, but maybe it was 5. And the top story was, as you say, a livable attic space that looked like a roof and had big windows in it. Yeah. So if you think of what we now think of as beautiful vintage Paris, it was a huge, kind of brutal clearance project with what at the time people thought was kind of unattractively similar or tidily similar, depending on your preferences, buildings all at the same time. And now we're like, oh, it's so romantic. Oh, it's so European. It's so vintage. And
that is really interesting. I had no idea about that whole background of it.
I'm not going to remember his first name, but the sort of social engineer of all that was a guy named Haussmann. 2 N's on the end of his name, so I remember it because it's like mine. Which is also weird because that's not a French name, but
definitely not.
He was a mover and shaker in Paris, and I'm not going to remember when either. But when there's a blog post for this episode, I'll put that date in there.
Well, not to get soundtracked, I just think that's funny because Denver Actually, about the time that the Neo-Mansard was happening, Denver was doing the exact same thing. We were doing what they called urban renewal, which involved demolishing blocks and blocks and blocks of downtown Denver. Many of those blocks remained undeveloped for decades. The whole idea was that they would demolish all of these blocks, and then, of course, that would pave the way for high-rise development or whatever, and totally remake downtown. And of course, it also involved clearing slums and clearing ethnic neighborhoods and all sorts of stuff. So that's eerily similar.
Right.
But
And
that,
it almost makes me wonder, not everybody probably, but was there someone involved in planning and design in that moment who was like, well, if we're doing neighborhood clearance projects, I guess we ought to put it in a Mansard style.
that is funny. Anyway, so what is a Neo-Mansard then? Um, so in the late 1960s, we started to see this kind of new housing style. It feels like sometime, it actually started happening in the late 1950s, but it really took hold kind of mid 1960s. I don't want to call it a rejection of modern architecture, but there was this notion that architects and home designers and whatnot we're going to start being more historicist in their style. A lot of times it was called early American style. Like you would have a ranch home that would have a lot of ornate detail on it. And it was supposed to be kind of colonial, but really the design of the house wasn't colonial in any way, shape, or form. But it was this notion of we're kind of hearkening back to our roots. And then they started bringing in styles of other places like France. And so in the late 1960s, you get these houses which have what we today call neo-mansard roofs. And what's interesting is they don't look a lot like the mansard roofs of France per se.
No, they don't have
But
the
they are
cream plaster
definitely
and the sort of green copper metal roof or any of those pieces. They just have the shape.
right. They were the same shapes. The idea of the top of the house would have um, kind of that angled roof, but it wasn't another whole floor. It was almost just like a little cap on the house. Although sometimes it was a second floor. Like that's kind of what I found about these is that there's a lot of variety to how they were executed. And so when I started, at first these houses were kind of invisible until I started really paying attention to them and realizing that actually this neo-mansard roof is everywhere. Like we have hundreds of them here in the Denver area, maybe thousands. I don't know.
I
And
sense a cataloging project coming on, depending on how long you stay
perhaps
excited about this.
maybe even more than that. Because when I started trying to figure out, I was like, so what are the roots of this? So, other than kind of the background I gave you that home builders and whatnot at the time were trying to pull from other sources than doing modern architecture or whatever. Um, so I wondered, like, is that all there is? Or was there like an architect who came up with this idea and that architect was the source of the Neo-Mansard? And as I tried to research it, I found nothing. I haven't found books about it. I haven't found articles or anything that says, hey, this is the source. But what I can tell you is from the late 1960s to the late 1970s, during this little 10-year window, it was like every architect who was anybody was doing Neo-Mansard stuff.
If okay, so you are so good at tracking down like who built this, who was the builder, who was the designer, all these things. By the way, this is for anyone who lives in a mid-century home that you don't know, isn't famous, isn't notable, isn't in a development that has a lot of history associated with it. This is how we start to figure things out when you can't Google it, when there isn't an article about it. You just sort of start tracking down property records and figuring out who had their name on it. But I'm curious about when you say every architect in the area in the era was doing it, were they each doing like, this is my one Neo-Mansard house and now I'm going to move on to things? Or were they kind of, are you finding the same architect's name associated with a couple?
Um, yeah. I've been finding that it was like, these architects had been doing other things before, and this was just like their Neo-Mansard period because I guess that's what their clients wanted or something like that.
I mean, as a
Um,
designer myself, I feel like once that the roof details of that are different, the structural details that are a little different. If I was going to do one of them, I wouldn't want to figure all of that out and then never think about it again. I guess unless I hated it, in which case, yeah, put it behind me. But that's so interesting that it just became this. Everybody had to try their hand at a Neo-Mansard roof, and we
Right.
certainly have them in the Midwest as well. Although right now in this moment, I'm going to say I don't think we have hundreds of them in Madison or thousands. But you've just identified also one of those classic things that happens with mid-century buildings, which is they can be very anonymous until you start paying attention. They can just kind of blend in the
It's
background.
true.
And then once you start looking for them, you start seeing them. And pretty soon you see them everywhere. So,
Yeah. And so what I've been doing that is kind of a funny thing. Been doing a few things. Like as a real estate agent, I've realized so we have this type and this and as I actually started posting these to social media, and I started doing something called Neo-Mansard Monday, and I called it, the day nobody asked for, but that everybody secretly loves. And so I would post a picture or a video of a Neo-Mansard house and get people's reactions. And one of the things that I found is that people either really like them or they hate them. They think they're the ugliest things they've ever seen. And so they're very polarizing. There aren't people who are like, oh, this is just so and so. It's so. This is like, I either hate it or I like it.
that's so funny. And I think that some people feel like that about the entire mid-century era. People don't normally feel meh about it. We either have people like you and me and everyone who's listening to this podcast right now, mid-century stands, or it's our, for lack of a more specific, less generalized term, our baby boomer parents who were like, that's a boring house I grew up in that I do not like the look of anymore.
Right.
That's so interesting. So people are really reacting to them. And
They are.
Are they giving you information you need as they react to them?
Not really. No. Because they don't seem to really know anything about them. And what's interesting too is the way that they're built. They almost invariably have a flat roof, but not all of them, not 100% of them, but most of them do. And really, the house is just a box. And the mansard part is actually tacked on to the box. So it's not even really a roof at all. It's almost like a misnomer that we call it a roof.
So,
Yep.
okay, actually, I'm curious because I have a pretty strong idea of how a house like this would be detailed in the Midwest. And I'm getting the sense that it's different in Denver. So when you say are these 1 or 2 story homes in Denver?
Both. I found them in ranches, but they're actually, it's kind of a mix between ranches, which is kind of the most rare, lots of tri-levels, and then lots of 2 stories.
Oh, fascinating. All right. We will put pictures into the blog post for the show notes page. So go check those out, everybody. Also, this is going to be in my Instagram when this episode goes live. But in the Midwest, I tend to think of a Neo-Mansard house as usually being 2 stories.
Mm-hmm.
The first story is sort of modernist, minimalist. And then the second story, the entirety of it is roof with some windows cut back into it. But the actual top, the hat of the house, is usually a very shallow sloped center peak rectangle with four triangle sides
Right.
shedding downwards.
Almost like a hip roof.
Exactly. Like a really, really, really flat hip roof.
A low slope hip roof. Yeah, we have a few of those.
Mm-hmm.
But most
also,
of them are
there's
not.
Sometimes a flat roof where you've got almost like a pediment of mansard going around it, hiding the flat roof edge. Is that how it's done in Denver? Interesting.
Yep, typically it's got a parapet that you wouldn't see from the street. Like all you would see is the Neo-Mansard part of it.
Well, you know what that feels like to me is that feels like an architect who does both commercial and residential work, borrowing a commercial detail to decorate the facade of a residential house.
That could be.
Because you'll see that in a strip mall building or something. They'll have, I don't think of them as mansard roofs as much because they usually don't have the windows coming. The roof and the windows don't interact.
Right. On the strip mall, it's almost just like a little hat. And that's the way a lot of people describe the Neo-Mansard roof is on these houses is it looks like a hat. Or the funny thing though is that it's not consistent at all. And this is what makes me go, this is more than a cataloging project. I almost think I need to write a book about this or something because when you see the photographs, um, you're going to see that there's a lot of variety among these houses. So some, it's just a little hat at the top. Others, though, the roof comes almost all the way down to the ground on parts of it. And on some houses, it's all over the place. So in some parts, like half the house is like a little hat, and the other half of the house, the roof comes all the way down to the ground. And then in some cases, the bottom of the house is brick, and then the top of the house is the mansard covering the whole second story, and you'll have dormers that stick out. Others have dormers that are recessed.
Cut in, yeah.
And so it's like, and then there's a style, and I'll include it in the photos too, where the mansard actually, it comes down and then it, at the bottom of the mansard, instead of just being flat and cut off like you see on most of them, it actually returns at an angle back to the roof, creating a really bizarre look to the house. And that's the funny thing I think a lot of people find about these houses is that they would probably call them weird. They're weird houses.
Well, and it's so interesting. I at the time this airs, I'll have just also shared an interview with Scott Sidler of the Craftsman blog, who was talking about how for all of history, we've pretty much built houses in very conventional ways. Certainly all of American history has very standard building techniques and kind of standard building looks. And then in the mid-century, everything went weird. We just started experimenting. Ranch houses themselves were an experiment. And he was speaking specifically about window types too, but like this is an example of just like a weird kind of house that got tried for a while. And I don't think anybody's building Neo-Mansard houses today.
Definitely not. In fact, one thing that we're seeing, and I should probably like get this information out there before it's an issue. On some multifamily projects, we're actually starting to see building owners de-mansard their houses or de-mansard their buildings. So they're tearing the mansard part off and completely restyling the building.
That feels like a shame. That feels like a loss of history.
I know. I never thought I might be interested in protecting these weird buildings, but yeah. And of course, like, one classic place where you see a neo-mansard, although it's kind of a more stylized neo-mansard than you typically see on these houses, is the old Wendy's restaurant design.
Yeah.
And Wendy's is now de-mansarding their restaurants these days.
Which
as a
also
lot of them
feels like a loss.
Right.
Well, interesting. And so, yeah, I think from anyone who's interested in what history has been and understanding it and, recognizing that it's cool and interesting and trying to preserve it, it's sad to see an effort to roll it back or erase it or make it go away. I guess I'm happier to see someone, if I had to pick, I'm happier to see someone de-mansard a house rather than knock it down.
Right.
But it's a shame.
But it does feel like a loss in a way. I don't know. The other thing I didn't mention is, and I don't know if this is typical across the country, but it was typical here, is that in most cases, these Neo-Mansard roofs had cedar shake shingles on them. So they were both this kind of French reference, but also rustic Colorado style. And we're actually seeing all that cedar shake go away now because of fire danger, fire codes, things like that. You can't do it anymore. So as a lot of people replace these cedar shakes, they're replacing them with all sorts of other materials, which changes the whole look of the house.
Right. I mean, anytime you change your roof, it changes the aesthetic, I guess, except a flat. But even there are angles from the street that you're going to see even a flat roof. But certainly when the roof is part of the walls and you change the roofing material, you have dramatically changed the house. Do you have a thought? Do you have a recommendation if someone if they're changing out their roof because they have to, and probably they're not permitted to do cedar shake anymore for fire risks in Colorado?
Yeah.
What should they do?
Well, of course, it's always the most expensive option. But there are roofing materials that are imitation cedar shake that you almost can't tell that it's different. And of course, it's more durable and whatnot, but and fire resistance, fireproof. but it's of course also the most expensive option.
Right. Well,
What a
the
lot of
option
people
we
are
like
doing is they're
as
putting on,
design professionals is always the most expensive
right,
option, isn't it?
right. A lot of people are putting on just asphalt shingles, which makes the house look a lot less interesting. It definitely changes the look of the house. I would venture to say downgrades the look of the house.
Yeah, and I would actually say just by the nature of having cedar shake shingles as the roofing material, that kind of marks these as a higher end choice originally in their original era that a neo-mansard house. I mean, anytime you're reaching beyond what's conventional, you're probably paying extra for that. It's because you cared.
Right?
Um, but yeah, taking off a mansard roof house done in asphalt shingles doesn't seem appealing or nice in any way to me. I would, if you're going to throw all the way back to the French mansard tradition, I'd say a standing seam metal roof wouldn't be an inappropriate choice, although it would
Some people have
certainly
been
be a
doing,
change.
they have been doing standing seam metal. That's been another option that I've seen people do. And I've seen some people doing just more of an asphalt tile look, which works pretty well because it's dimensionally looks like the cedar shake, even though it's a little different look. It's not as rustic, but it tends to work.
Yeah. Oh, this is cueing all sorts of thoughts for me, and it really feels like it's sort of the leading edge of the mid-century going into the late 70s, into the 80s,
Yes.
when we
One might
started to
call it
see
transitional.
it is a
Um,
transitional
Although
style,
what's
yeah.
funny is when I typically use the term transitional, I'm using it to describe a house that is going modern. It's trying to be both traditional and modern in the direction of going modern. This is now, as we went into the 70s and into the 80s, there was the reverse movement of transitioning from modern to traditional. So this is like transitional in the opposite direction.
Yeah, I mean, when I think about, I grew up in a neighborhood of 70s eras homes, and they were some interesting split levels, but as the next block over was built a little later and built a little later after that, and we get a lot of just sort of like I would think of it as sort of a proto McMansion with a style just sort of applied to the front of it. The English style, the faux Tudor style, the
Yes.
Frenchish style,
Yes.
I'm now thinking of a house in that neighborhood that had a neo-mansard. Wow, okay, you
And I
know
think
what?
we've
They're
talked about
everywhere. Oh my
that thing
gosh.
in the past, and that one of the biggest things that differentiates mid-century houses from late 20th century homes is the fact that they finished all four sides of the house in the mid-century. Um, and on these Neo-Mansards, they were still finishing all four sides of the house generally. But you're right, that's like kind of after that, into the 70s and the 80s, they started just finishing the front of the house and not finishing the other three sides.
Not finishing the other three. I mean, sometimes it was like brick on the front, vinyl on the other three sides in the worst case
Yep.
scenarios. But even still, it was just like clear, or like the one that always stuck out to me, even as a kid, because I was, studying history in school and being like, why are people in Illinois suburbs trying to do a colonial style on their house? Like, why do we want to, yay, the slavery era? Um, and also, it just felt so like this is not our tradition. This is not our history.
Hmm.
Why are we trying to make a fake colonial house that was clearly built in 1985? What? But
Totally a
you
thing.
could stick any kind of front entry onto your classic sort of two-story.
Yeah. Well, and builders even offered elevations. But one of and that's a couple of the other things that make these neo-mansard homes interesting. Not only are they finished on all four sides, but the designers of these houses were kind of trying to take advantage of their unique architecture. The fact that they were just a box, which interestingly, a lot of houses being built today are just boxes, but they don't have neo-mansard decorations on them. But they were taking advantage of the fact that they were building boxes and having maybe a lower box next to a taller box and things like that. And there are several examples where they've integrated balconies into these or two height spaces in a way that kind of actually really works architecturally. And again, going back to the notion that these are transitional, there's several examples I've found where they're still doing floor to ceiling glass on the main level and modern things like that. And in fact, one of the most modern things is that, in Colorado, we have very few examples of atrium style or courtyard style homes where you have a home that completely surrounds an atrium or a courtyard, right? And most of the houses I can think of that still exist in the Denver area that have atriums in the middle of them are Neo-Mansard ranch homes. So if you really want an atrium, you're not going to get the Eichler look. But if you go shopping and find a Neo-Mansard ranch home, there's a chance there might be an atrium in the middle of that, completely surrounded by glass and like all the things that you would think of an Eichler atrium home, but it's 1970s Neo-Mansard style.
That's fascinating. So your answer is probably going to be it's inconsistent because the style of the Mansard's roofs have been inconsistent. But what would you expect to see on the inside of a house that was a Neo-Mansard in terms of is it going to be more mid-century traditional? Is it always going to be reaching more modern? Does it have a rustic vibe? Is it tipping towards more sort of postmodern early 80s? What wouldn't surprise you to find inside a Neo-Mansard?
I found that it really depends on the house. Since a lot of these were built in the mid 1970s, if you find one that has a lot of its original finishes in it, one of the biggest things you're going to find is what I've heard people refer to as the early ugly era cabinetry and woodwork, where they're doing a lot of very dark stains. They're doing a lot of really almost kind of ornate paneling, but with a modern touch to it, with like a pull, like a pounded brass handle in the middle of the
I can
cabinet.
picture it. Yeah,
I'm sure you can imagine. So that's kind of the kind of fit and finish that were inside a lot of these was that 1970s dark wood, very dark stained wood fit and finish. But there are some examples that are more rustic. You go in and there's real wood paneling inside still and stuff like that. Which is kind of, I think it depended on really how what level of home you were talking about. A nicer home would have had the wood paneling in it, whereas a lower level home might have just drywall.
interesting. This to me, it feels like one of those distinct typologies that, I mean, you can see it everywhere across the country, but there aren't that many of them. People kind of, again, love or hate them or even identify with them. It strikes me as falling into the same category as like an A-frame.
Yes.
Being
very similar to an A-frame.
It's like your whole personality. If you choose that as your house,
yes.
It affects the way, A-frame maybe a little bit more affects the way you can even live and occupy the space, but they have that sort of sense of like, we're this one in the neighborhood and everybody knows who we are.
And of course, I'm always posting just the exterior of these houses because I haven't really gotten into that many of them. But I have had at least a few people ask me, what are those houses like on the inside? Because I think one of the things they're hoping is that if you go up into the mansard, if it's one that has a mansard roof around the second level, they're hoping that you come in and that the walls are actually leaning in on that second level. And unfortunately, I have yet to see that. It really is typically a tacked on element on a box. But that would be neat if they had done that.
Yeah, it's more of, and honestly, if you're not gonna get the lean on the inside of the walls, you ought to be insulating the heck out of that cavity for
right.
Here.
Although that cavity gives you a nice airspace where you really are getting a little bit of natural insulation there anyway.
That's true. Yeah. I at the start of this conversation, I said I couldn't think of a lot of these around here, and the examples are popping into my head like popcorn.
You're going to see them everywhere next time you go out.
And I'm thinking about a house tour I did actually, an architect designed house that was on. What we do these. There's an organization that does Wright and like tours, so they do Frank Lloyd Wright houses, Frank Lloyd Wright apprentice houses, and then just houses that are similar in that sort of era and style. And there was definitely one. That I toured, and I think we were not allowed to take interior photographs of, unfortunately. But it might have been weird enough to actually have slanting interior walls. I'm going to have to go back through my camera roll and see if I can find it out. But
I can think of one that probably has them. It's actually one I'll share a picture of. But it's kind of like one part of the house is a double height space where the roof goes all the way to the ground. And it's almost like an A-frame with the top chopped, the top of the A chopped off. But what makes it interesting is also the rest of the house is a Neo-Mansard. So it's really more relating to that Neo-Mansard roof than being an A-frame. But that's the one house I can think of that probably does have walls that lean in almost like an A-frame.
That's so interesting. Well, this is going to be an exploration. I think also Does this happen? Because again, I'm thinking of another house here in Madison, blocks from where I'm sitting right now, where they took a Neo-Mansard style and then they also built that cedar shake angled wall into a carport design that sprung
Oh,
off from the building. And that's an angled wall with no interior finish, so it has
right.
gives you a little more room at the bottom of the carport space than up at the top. But
Interesting.
you've just sparked a new obsession. This is great. I love this. Okay, so I had a couple of follow-up questions that are more general around this because this is a perfect example of when your house isn't designed by X brand name architect. You know, you don't have a Cliff May house, you don't have an Eichler house, you don't know then its local famous architect so and so, but you want to learn more about it. One thing you're going to do is just look around for other houses that look like yours and study them visually.
Yep.
Compare them. It's just a like, this looks like this or doesn't thing. You've done all the right things of posting on social media, although no one's come through for you yet with like, oh, yes, I know all about this and allow me to tell you. Because it'll happen. But what else do you recommend when someone is just curious about a topic and they want to know more and there isn't the book on that hasn't been written yet?
Right. You know, I face this all the time. I have people call me. They're like, I want to learn about my house. I want to learn more. And I even just offer it as a real estate agent as kind of a value add to my clients. Like when you buy this house or when you sell this house, you're about to learn more about it because I'm going to do the digging. But really, the place where I find the most gold is just in the newspaper. And what's wonderful is for the last decade, I've been digging through newspapers to try to find information. And that entailed taking trips down to the downtown library where they have the newspapers all on microfiche and basically digging for needles in a haystack. But more and more as time goes along, these newspapers are being scanned and they're becoming searchable. And that is amazing. And there are paid service like newspapers.com and things like that. But actually, more and more, actually, the Denver Public Library, for instance, in Denver now has a searchable scanned copy of all of the Denver Post
Oh, wow.
available for free for library card holders. And for those who want to search like the Rocky Mountain News, there's another nonprofit called the Colorado Historic Newspaper Collection, also free. You can go on there and search. And I imagine most other cities are starting to have these free resources where you can jump on and search the newspaper. So you go in, try typing in your address or try typing in your neighborhood name. Or if you know the builder of your neighborhood, try typing in the name of the builder. And you wouldn't believe the gems in like advertisements and articles and stuff that you're going to find. You may learn, oh, hey, my house actually was designed by an architect. I had no idea.
As one of a dozen or just this one. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, that's amazing. And I should say for people outside of Denver, that's interesting that the Denver Library chose to make their own searchable archive. Here in Madison, for example, your library card gets you free access to newspapers.com. So you can
Oh,
use
that's
their museum
nice.
and you don't have to pay for it.
Excellent.
And that's an interestingly salty choice by Denver to be like, no, we won't pay for your service, but we'll make our own. We've got an intern who can do that.
Well, their service is hosted by some other newspaper archive company, but yeah, I've had a newspaper.com subscription for a long time. So that's great to know that libraries are actually offering that for free. That's awesome.
And that, I think, one way or another, I think the first stop when you want to learn more about anything mid-century is go to the reference desk at your local library branch and just ask what free resources are available to you, or go to the website and poke around. But usually if you speak to a person, they will know. And this is like, I'm speaking to you right now.
Yeah.
You'll go tell me what worked for you. And it's always nice to get that.
Yes.
You know,
And if you're one of those lucky few who do have an architect designed home and you know who the architect is and things like that, particularly if it's a very well-known architect, go to the library or go to your local historic preservation organization or whatever. Most states and a lot of cities have them. And oftentimes when these architects pass away, their papers, their archive, their drawings, everything gets collected and goes to a place like that, either a library or a university or something. So if you really want to dig deep and learn about the architect who designed your home, if you know who they are, oftentimes there is an archive somewhere, if you can find it, that has all of that architect's papers.
Yeah, and I will say, if they're not dead yet, or if their business isn't dead yet, I'm flashing back to fun times I had in grad school. One summer, I had a job. I imagine big or I work for I work for myself. I've always worked for tiny firms. We never paid anyone to answer the phones, but I worked for a big skyscraper architect in Minneapolis, where my job was basically to sit there and answer the phone if it rang, which it did not ring very much, and occasionally to organize files. Oh no, occasionally to put together marketing materials. But during the summer I worked there, we moved from one building to the next adjacent skyscraper. Don't ask. And so we moved all the file records. And one week my job was to move boxes, and it also was to like hang out in the box room. And I cracked them open and found the residential sketches that one of the first founders of the firm had done for a bunch
Oh,
of people.
wow.
And they were so cool. And I just, I don't think I even identified them as, I didn't identify them as mid-century buildings now, but looking back, they absolutely all
They
were cool
probably
mid-century
were.
houses. And at that point later, the firm only did malls and mega churches and like big corporate stuff. But back in the day, they'd done some houses, and I have no idea if the current owners of those houses had any idea where the records were. But the guy who designed them, his name was still in the firm. So that's another place to go. If you can track down the name, or you can figure out like where did they work, there might be a box room somewhere,
Yeah.
very dusty, where you could, I'm sure they would let anybody go in there and just like poke around and find things. So anyway, fun things to research. All right. So I think this is so inspiring just to find another rabbit hole and get excited about it and figure out what's the history of your particular place, but also Neo-Mansard houses are everywhere. So when you travel, you can go looking for them. You can compare Neo-Mansard in Denver to Neo-Mansard in the
Yeah.
Midwest to California.
If you go on the show notes or whatever and you see the photographs and you realize that's what a Neo-Mansard is, you're going to see them everywhere. And then you're going to start asking the same questions like, why does that one look like that? And then you'll be going down the same rabbit hole I am. Like,
So I guess I'm going to use this chance right now. Everyone who's listening, if you are a chattier extrovert than either of us, and you want to go knock on the door of people who live in Neo-Mansard homes and ask to see inside of them, ask if you can share pictures. I won't
yes.
do it, but you might. Marvelous. So have you had the chance to sell or buy for someone Neo-Mansard house yet?
No, but
That's a
I'm
great way.
hoping that somebody will take me up on it. And actually, I've been doing a funny thing as well. In addition to my new Neo-Mansard Mondays, if you go to my website, I have a page now devoted to just the Neo-Mansard homes for sale in the Denver area. And I can probably, without doing a lot of research, I can probably say that my claim is accurate, that I'm the only real estate agent in the country who has a curated page devoted to Neo-Mansard homes for sale. So, and what is wild, and I include both multifamily and single family homes on there. Like in the middle of the summer, there were well over 100 listings of Neo-Mansard homes for sale in the city, which kind of blew my mind. I was like, really?
What's your sense from having been interested in this and talked to people about it? Do you think it's a plus or a minus for a house trying to find a new owner to be a Neo-Mansard house?
Man, I don't know yet.
Well, I'll say this. I think when I think about finding and buying a mid-century house, my personal goal, my goal for anybody is to find something that's sort of unappreciated for what it is. And then, hopefully you're not make yourself like something you don't like, but
Right.
find the beauty in something and find the like this needs love, this needs maintenance, this needs a shine up, but like
I think it is the kind of home that you could really kind of embrace and adopt and like just dive headlong into like really understanding and like I don't know, really appreciating this kind of house. It's full of, whether you love it or hate it, and people love them or hate them, there's no question that these homes have a certain character to them.
they're saying something. And I think that That just to jump back to an earlier topic, I think they're an example of the mid-century experimentation. That's part of why all mid-century is so much fun, so playful, so creative, so interesting, because it was never trying to be bland. Sometimes it was trying to be universal, but it was always trying to be interesting. And these certainly were. You don't ever design or build a Neo-Mansard house sort of because you were half-assing it.
Right. Yeah, because it's extra. Like what builder would be like, oh, we're going to spend all this extra money tacking on this thing on the top. Like,
do it a new and different way. We're going to make the builders put on, learn different techniques. We're going to design different details.
Yeah.
Let's go.
And we're going to do a flat roof, which most residential builders don't know how to do flat roofs. That's a unique thing in and of itself.
Well, this really makes me think that at least it's a fairly common thing for residential architects to kind of go back and forth between small commercial and residential. And so it really feels like they're trying,
especially in a smaller market like Denver.
Yeah. They're trying to innovate and borrow ideas back and forth between their two typologies. And that's really fun too. Yeah. Well, this has been such an interesting rabbit hole. We're going to have so many pictures of Neo-Mansard houses on the show notes page. So go check that out. And also, I think we'll put out a call. I mean, you're doing it right now. Go ahead and go back. Do you have a tag for your Neo-Mansard Mondays?
It's just hashtag Neo-Mansard Monday.
That's easy to do. So you can go back and see everything that you've been posting. Adam, how long have you been on this kick already?
I want to say it's been more than a year now.
All right. So there's an archive already on Instagram.
Yeah, and I haven't done it every single Monday, but there's a lot of them. So, yeah.
Well, this is so fun. And apropos of nothing, I think one of the first houses I did, it was before I was doing mid-century master plans, but one of the first houses I did design work on here in Madison was actually a 2-story Neo-Mansard house. And I need to dig up the sketches for that somewhere. So they're around. And apparently I've even designed one and forgotten all about it until just we started talking about it. So
that's hilarious.
This really is the proof. I think mid-century houses hide in plain sight in front of you. Mid-century office buildings, mid-century apartment buildings. And of course, we're losing them all the time. So let's highlight what's cool about them and try to draw attention to and preserve them. But once you start looking for a mid-century feature, you start seeing it absolutely everywhere. And now this is your next obsession and ours, Neo-Mansard houses.
Yes.
Okay, you came. You listened. Thank you for being a good sport about this crazy little research rabbit hole for the both of us. And maybe you're sold on the idea that a mansard roof mid-century house could be a cool thing. Maybe you're starting to think about some houses in the area that are suspiciously mansard-like that you've just been driving by every day and not thinking about, but now they're popping up to the top of your consciousness. Maybe as you go driving around on your errands over the next week, you will see them where you had never spotted them before. That's what happened to me immediately as we started discussing this. But one way or another, I'm very curious to know whether you have just been charmed by this topic, whether you're sort of fascinated in the way that one is by rubbernecking a car accident, hoping everyone's okay, but not at all attracted to it, or whether you're just like, Della, why did you two oddballs spend this whole time talking about mansard roof houses on mid-century buildings? That's an odd thing to do. Let me know. Pop over, say hey in my Instagram story, say hey to Adam. Let us know if you've got mansard roof details to report, if you've lived in or loved one, if you've found it to be practical, if you've ever visited one, or if there's one in your area that you've got questions or answers about. Let's all form part of the research circle and have a little fun thinking about this specific style. And if you had so much fun listening to Adam and you wish he was talking more about your style of house, don't worry, I will have him back on the podcast again to talk more about mid-century history, being a researcher and a curator of your own home, and how to advocate for all mid-century houses everywhere, all the time, as he does. Okay, catch you next week, Mid-Mod Remodeler. This has been fun. This episode was written and recorded by me, Della Hansman, and produced by Rebecca Rossi. If you'd like to support the show and mid-century homes in general, please subscribe so that you never miss an episode. You can help other people find us when you leave a rating and review, or recommend us directly to a friend with a mid-century house. Find more of Mid-Mod Remodel on Instagram, YouTube, or pop right over to our website to check out our services. I would love to design a master plan for your home, or teach you how to create one for yourself in my Ready to Remodel program. Thanks so much for listening to Mid-Mod Remodel. I love that you love your mid-century house. I love it too.